Hey Hunters, Halozu here for another uh, D&D 5.5 project video. So this is my custom system that's kind of designed as a rework of Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Uh, and this is another thing coming from the 2024 updates that I've started planning for and laying the groundwork for when I do get to rewriting the classes. So nothing's actually been rewritten with this in mind, but this is the new weapon mastery system for D&D 5.5. So before we begin, first we have to look at the 2024 version of weapon mastery, which is the new system we're getting. Uh, so already I will say I don't like it. I think it is heavily flawed. Like, especially because ultimately my biggest issue is that it tries to both add tactical choices to martial classes and add more variety to the very dull weapon list of the 2024 D&D weapons, where it's trying to do two things, but I feel like that actually betrays both of them. Because on the side of the specific weapon, because they're tied to specific weapons, as each weapon mastery is applied to a certain weapon. So if you have mastery with a certain weapon, then you have a very specific property predetermined for you that activates whenever you hit with the weapon or use the weapon. But because of that, it doesn't really function at adding tactical choices. Because usually you don't switch between weapons mid-combat because it's clunky. I don't know if they changed it to be, oh yeah, you can freely swap weapons for free. But without that, this straight up does not work. And even then, it still kind of just does, like, still go back to, well, I want to use my best weapon or the weapon I'm specialized in, so I'm just going to use that and nothing else. So it just, ultimately, you're asking players to play in a completely different way than how they actually play, and it even then it just doesn't work. Like, the way you want it to be played isn't really fun. It's kind of clunky. It just doesn't work, and so it's like you just spam the same option over and over again. It's like, technically you can swap them each day, but it's like that doesn't really matter. You're using the same weapon each day for the most part, so it's very rare that you would have such a vast arsenal that you could swap between freely. It's not like Monster Hunter. It's like you have to actually carry the weapon around, and like, sure, some people absolutely will carry around a plethora of weapons and have fun with that, but ultimately that's not really something we do in 5e or any RPG game, really. At least for tabletop RPG games. That's not really something you see. Like, at least for fantasy RPG games. Sci-fi ones, that gets a bit different, but that is due to the way they function being very different and encouraging having a greater variety. But end of the day, for this, it's like, so instead of making a system that actually adds tactical choices, you've added one that would add a tactical choice if it wasn't a pain to actually utilize it. Especially since some DMs are stingy with magic items, where it's like, yeah, you have a variety of weapons, but you're not really good at using any of them. So, what's the point? Like, I have one good weapon anyway, so why do I waste time caring about other options? Like, because most of the time it'll devolve into mastery in your melee weapon, mastery in your ranged weapons. Everything else is irrelevant. Uh, Now, in some obscure cases, there might be a few more that you get. Like, you might have a bludgeoning weapon instead of just a slashing weapon, but like you might have a reach weapon if you're two-handed, but other than that, usually it just ends up being here's my melee, here's my ranged. That's it. And then on the weapon side, I mean, it only adds a little difference, and it's only for martials. So battlecasters, you have to get a feat in order to get the benefit of this, which is fair, but it doesn't really solve the issue that the weapons themselves are boring. And some of the properties, like Nick, Push, and Vex, Vex in particular being probably the biggest offender, with Push being a little too good with a certain second rank spell that somehow evaded errata when it really needed some. Simply due to the nature of the game now not really working with something that was already uh it was already being abused by some builds. Now it's even easier to abuse it. Yeah. But and then Nick is just very good quality of life for a lot of builds, so it's like, yeah, it's kind of worth taking. But those three just kind of push out other options because, like, well, it's like Push is really powerful though, especially because a certain spell exists at all and is kind of stupid with it. Uh, and then Vex is Vex and somehow got past playtesting, even though it enables an infinite loop of advantage where a fighter can just have advantage forever at a certain point. Which, yeah, it's late game, and yeah, marshals need buffs, but infinite advantage is the last thing they need. I'll be very blunt. And it's like, it ultimately pushes you to just, oh yeah, I just want to use my Vex weapon as much as possible, like a rogue. I just want to use a Vex weapon because I get infinite advantage. Like, if I hit, I get more advantage. How could I not want to just use the Vex weapon all the time? Or why would I not be using my push weapon? Because it's just so good with that certain stupid spell. Or, I'm a dual wielder, so why wouldn't I use Nick to get even more dual attacks? It just becomes a thing where it really just ends up being more one-dimensional than I think they wanted. It kind of fails at what it wanted to do, which was add tactical choices, because, like, it just adds some additional effects to my weapon. And it just changes which weapons I want to take. That's all this does. And thus, I'm not implementing this version. It is going to be a completely new version. And here we go. So this is going to appear on 6 classes. So it will be on the Barbarian, the Fighter, the Monk now, the Paladin, the Ranger, the Rogue, and then for new classes, the Artificer, the Mistblade, the Rune Priest, Talarist, Warden, and Warlord, aka all 12 Marshals. If you don't have cantrips, you have these. And Weapon Mastery is now associated with something called Exploits, which are at-will abilities like a cantrip that can be used with almost any weapon. You do have to be proficient with it to use an exploit, however. Now, keep in mind, not all exploits can be used at any time. Some will require certain weapons, and you will learn a certain amount unless you're a fighter who straight up prepares them instead. So they're the only class right now planned to prepare exploits so they can swap them each day. Everyone else, you're stuck with your choices for the rest of the game. How these work is when you first make a weapon attack on your turn, and keep in mind, damaging unarmed strikes are a kind of weapon attack in 5.5, so those have been synonymized rather than the kind of stupid rule of unarmed strikes being treated as different from weapons. So in 5.5, the damaging option is going to be synonymized with a weapon attack, but the other two will be their own thing. So grapple and shove will be different, but they're still under unarmed strike rules. It's just the damaging option for unarmed strikes is a weapon attack. So anything that works with a weapon attack works on unarmed attacks. There. But anyway, the first time you make a weapon attack on your turn, you choose an exploit you know and apply it to all weapon attacks and attack actions made that turn. So this is only during your turn. This does not affect opportunity attacks and stuff like that normally. Mostly for the sake of fairness and convenience, because some of these can get kind of stupid with opportunity attacks. So it's like, yeah, granted, some classes will have ways of getting around that. For example, fighter may or may not be getting a way to use exploits with opportunity attacks, but that's the thing. Like, you get your opportunity attack, but you don't get weapon masteries normally, so you can't use exploits. But any weapon attack you make during your turn will get the benefit of the exploit. Do note, however, if you are using multiple different types of weapon, you can't use the same exploit on all of them. So, for example, if you have an exploit that requires a ranged weapon, and you decide, okay, that's the exploit I want to use, but one of your attacks is a melee attack for some reason, like say you're wielding a rapier and hand crossbow, and you use a ranged weapon exploit, only your hand crossbow attacks would benefit from the exploit, whereas rapier attacks would not. Similarly, if you had one that worked with a melee weapon, it would only work on the rapier attacks, not your hand crossbow attacks. But if you used one that has any weapon as a prerequisite, or has some sort of trait that that would apply to both, or it's one that has two traits as an option, but both apply to it, then you do get to use the exploit on both. Also, the save DC is 8 plus your proficiency bonus. Assuming you're proficient with the weapon, though I'm not sure if I want to let you use exploits with weapons you're not proficient with. I might make it where you just don't gain proficiency to the save DC if you don't have proficiency of the weapon. I might also just let it be you have to be proficient. I don't know yet. But you also add whatever stat you use to attack with. So whatever you use for the attack and damage roll, that is the modifier used for the save DC. So what this means is if you make an attack with your strength, you'll use your strength for the saving DC. If you're attacking with dexterity, you use dexterity for the save DC. But if for some reason you were using charisma or intelligence, then in that case, you would use that stat instead. Though none of these classes use alternate stats to attack with. Well, except the Artificer, I think. I might let them use intelligence for weapons and stuff, but they're currently the only one I'm considering as an exception. But other classes, if you had exploits through a feat, for example, then that's how you would function. So your exploits known for the base classes, you'll have 2 to 4 by default. So if you have 3, like the Barbarian, Monk, and Rogue to start with, you'll go from 3 at first level to 4 at 4th level to 5 at 9th level, and then 6 at 15th. Do note, these are the 4 levels where your cantrips known are modified. So there is a new cantrip for casters at 15th level. So the same is applied to martial classes here. Then all of the half caster and the half psionic classes, they start with only 2 exploits known and go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Then the fighter has 4 exploits known by default, and they go up to 7. As for the new classes, the artificer will start with 3, go to 6. I just realized I forgot to change the Mistblade, who is supposed to have 2 to 5, because they're a half-caster. The Rune Priest goes from 3 to 6. The Talarist goes from 2 to 5, as they're half-psionic. The Warden goes from 3 to 6. And then the Warlord goes from 4 to 7. So they get the same number as a fighter, but they learn their exploits. Now, what can you expect from these exploits? Let's show you 4. So these are some of the ones I have done. There may or may not be only 6. And one of them may or may not be very similar to one here. But this is just a selection of 4 that I've chosen to kind of show you what sort of stuff is around. So I also realized that Vex is typoed. But first we have Cleave, which is a returning one, along with Vex. So Cleave requires that it's any melee weapon. So as long as you're using a melee weapon, you can use Cleave. And yes, there will be a ranged variant. That was the one that was identical to one here. So for each melee weapon attack you would make, that normally adds your attack modifier to the damage roll. So, for example, the offhand attack, unless you have dual weapon fighting style, would not count for this. But, like, any attack on your attack action, so whenever you would do that, you can make 2 attacks against different targets in your reach instead of just 1 attack. But you don't get your attack modifier to the damage roll, so it only deals 1 weapon damage on a hit. So you don't get any bonuses. It's just a flat dice roll, plus any damage roll bonuses you would normally have. You just don't add the strength or dexterity to the attack roll, or to the damage roll. So it's a very simple one, but it's a useful one if you need to multi-target. I might also do a special trait where if you only attack different creatures, so you don't attack the same creature at all, you get a bonus to the damage dealt. But I don't know. I might do that, I might not. I don't. It's a bit weird, but well. Then we have Vex, which is significantly nerfed. It can be used with any weapon, however. Not just melee. It's supposed to be any weapon. Whenever you hit a creature with a weapon attack, your next weapon attack roll against that creature has +2 on the attack roll, and this lasts for a round. I didn't list the timings, because space. Excuse me. Sorry if that was very loud. But anyway, Vex is still going to buff your accuracy. It just will not have infinite loops of get combat advantage. Nor will it be as rampantly powerful with stuff like Champion. So then we get to the new ones, which include Bleed, which requires you to be doing slashing damage with your weapon. So whenever you deal damage with a slashing weapon to a creature, at the end of their next turn, they have to make a con save or take 2 bleed damage for each slashing attack you hit them with on this turn. So basically, what that's trying to say is each time you hit them on this turn when you use the exploit, it adds basically a stack of a bleed is a way to explain it. And then at the end of their next turn, they take damage equal to double the number of bleed stacks on them. So if you hit them with 3 slashing attacks, then they have to make a con save against 6 bleed damage. And note that this is using the new physical damage type, which is designed specifically for stuff like this, actually, where it's like, oh yeah, damage over time thing. Here you go. Then we have, so these 3 are actually currently class agnostic, meaning that anyone can pick these up. But this next one is exclusive to a class. So there's currently 12 of these planned, so there's going to be 1 per class. And here we have the Paladins. They can use this with any weapon, and it is called Divine. And what it does is very simple. Choose Radiant or Necrotic damage. Your weapon attacks deal damage of that type in addition to their normal type. So basically, you infuse your attacks with divine power. So it doesn't do much, but this does get around resistances and can exploit vulnerabilities. Also, as an additional part of it, if you have the Paladin Smite feature, so basically if you're more than 1 level into Paladin, you can choose the damage type you've currently prepared for Divine Smite instead. So each day you get to choose a damage type for your Divine Smite to do from your Sacred Oath. That is a mechanic that I'm planning to keep around and continue into 5.5's 2024 update in the planning. But Divine will actually key into that. So that's the kind of stuff you can expect from these class-specific ones where it's like, hey, we know you're a member of this class, so here's a bonus to what you're doing. So you get a lot of shenanigans with this of, oh yeah, you know, I have a special ability. Okay, it ties into that special ability. But anyway, without further ado, this has been a surprisingly short video for once, showing you the basics of Weapon Mastery as it is currently in development. Do keep in mind that these numbers are subject to change. For example, I might decide that the Vex Weapon Mastery is going to do +3 to the attack roll. Or Bleed might just be 1 damage per. I might also change what weapons can benefit from these. Also, I might add it to where the ones that are not the class-specific ones are also going to be locked to certain classes rather than most of the Weapon Mastery exploits are going to be class-agnostic, and then these are all class-specific. For example, I might say rogues can't get cleave, monks can't get bleed, something like that, but I don't know. Also, there may be an additional system added on top of it for a kind of daily resource thing. I don't know if I'm going to do it, though, but we'll see. I will keep considering stuff. But anyway, without further ado, I will see y'all next time. Halo Zoo, out.